Imagine this: someone criticizes you, questions your choices, or even attacks your character. Instantly, your heart races, your mind scrambles, and your first instinct is to defend yourself. But what if I told you that every time you defend yourself, you lose more than you gain? What if the real power doesn't come from explanations, justifications, or arguments, but from something far simpler, far stronger, and far more terrifying to those trying to control you? In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why letting go of defense is the single most powerful move you can make and how it can change your life forever. Defending yourself gives away your power, because the moment you step into that space of explanation, you've already agreed to someone else's terms. You've already told them, you have the right to question me. And maybe that sounds small, maybe it sounds polite, but it's not. It's surrender. It's taking your calm, your certainty, your sense of direction, and handing it to someone who hasn't earned it. You might think you're being reasonable, that you're showing maturity or trying to keep peace, but what you're really doing is saying, I need you to see me the way I see myself. And that's the most fragile place you can live from. Because once you start living for understanding, you'll never stop chasing it. People will misunderstand you on purpose. Some will twist your words just to test your reaction. Others will question your choices because it makes them uncomfortable with their own. And if every time that happens, you go into defense mode, you're not protecting yourself, you're proving their power. You're showing that they have the ability to shake your peace, to steer your focus, to make you trade your truth for their comfort. That's what defending yourself does. It shifts the spotlight from your reality to their opinion. And the more you do it, the smaller you become in your own story. Think about it. The strongest people you've ever met, those who seem calm, grounded, unbothered, they don't explain themselves every time someone disagrees. They don't rush to justify their boundaries or their silence. They don't panic when they're misunderstood. They understand something most people never learn: your worth doesn't need to be proven. It needs to be lived. When you defend yourself, you're trying to convince someone who probably doesn't even want to understand you in the first place. They're not listening for truth. They're listening for cracks. They want a reaction because reactions are proof of control. When you explain, when you defend, when you try to make them get it, you think you're solving the problem, but you're actually feeding it. Because the more you engage, the more they believe they have a right to your explanation. They start expecting it. And before you know it, you're walking on eggshells around opinions that don't even matter. That's how people lose their peace. Not because someone took it, but because they gave it away every time they felt misunderstood. Defending yourself also changes your internal dialogue. You stop asking, what do I believe? And start asking, how do I make them believe me? And that's dangerous because it pulls your focus away from your own truth. Instead of building from conviction, you start living from correction. You begin editing yourself for approval, and that's how you lose authenticity. When you live to defend, you live reactive. And when you live reactive, you stop being intentional. Your energy, your words, your presence, they all start serving someone else's comfort instead of your own clarity. Now, let's be real. It's not easy to stop defending yourself. We've been trained to. Since childhood, we've been taught to explain our choices, to justify our mistakes, to make people understand that our intentions were good. We're told that communication solves everything, but the truth is, communication only works when both sides are listening. When one side just wants control, explanation becomes a trap, because no matter how perfectly you explain yourself, they'll always find something to twist. They'll move the goalpost, they'll question your tone, your timing, your motive, until you're exhausted And they're satisfied, not because they understood, but because they got what they wanted, your energy. And that's the key, energy. Every time you defend yourself, you're spending emotional energy that could have been used to move forward. You're pouring it into a black hole of someone else's opinion. It's like arguing with the wind. It doesn't hear you, it just keeps blowing. You think you're fighting to be seen, but what you're really doing is standing still. You're delaying your own growth by stopping to explain every step you take. That's why defending yourself isn't strength, it's distraction. It keeps you trapped in moments that don't deserve your attention. There's also an emotional cost. Defending yourself constantly creates anxiety because you start anticipating judgment before it even happens. You rehearse your explanations in your head. You prepare your words for imaginary conversations. You walk into rooms already on guard. That's not peace. That's performance. And peace doesn't exist where performance lives. When you stop defending yourself, you start realizing that peace isn't something you earn. It's something you protect. You protect it by refusing to justify your choices to people who haven't lived your battles. You protect it by trusting your intent more than their interpretation. And let's talk about the ego for a second. The ego loves to defend. It loves to prove. It loves to say, I'll show them. But the ego doesn't care about peace. It cares about winning. It wants the last word, the clear victory, the validation. But here's the thing, ego victories are temporary. They feed your pride, not your purpose. Every time you defend out of ego, you might win the argument, but lose the stillness. You might feel right, but stay restless. True power isn't in proving, it's in preserving. Preserving your calm, your boundaries, your focus. That's where real control lives. When you stop defending, something amazing happens. People reveal themselves. The ones who genuinely care about you won't need an explanation. They'll feel your intent. They'll trust your silence. But the ones who were only around to question you will get frustrated because they've lost access to your energy. And that's when you realize the power of restraint. Not every question deserves an answer. Not every accusation deserves attention. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. You gain more control by saying less. You earn more respect by staying calm. You build more trust in yourself by not needing to be understood. And the moment you stop defending, you start observing. You see who's genuinely curious and who's just trying to pull you into a debate you can't win. You start noticing how much lighter life feels when you don't carry the weight of other people's opinions. Defending yourself is like watering weeds. It gives life to things that don't deserve to grow. The less you water, the faster they die. And when they die, what remains is clarity. You start making decisions not from fear of judgment, but from a deep knowing that your worth is not up for debate. You become immune to opinions because you finally understand people will always talk. They'll misunderstand your silence, your kindness, your boundaries, your ambition. But that's not your burden to carry. You don't owe anyone a press conference on your life. You don't owe them an explanation for your healing, your distance, your peace. The less you defend, the more powerful you become. Because power isn't loud, it's steady. It's the quiet confidence of knowing who you are even when others don't. It's the strength to walk away from conversations that don't serve you. It's the courage to be misunderstood and still remain grounded. And that's a kind of strength that can't be taken, only given away. And it's time you stop giving it. Silence speaks louder than explanation because silence isn't the absence of a response. It's the presence of control. It's the moment you decide that your peace matters more than being understood. In a world where everyone is shouting to be heard, silence becomes power. It's unsettling. It makes people stop, question, and reflect in ways that words never could. When you choose silence, you're not avoiding confrontation. You're elevating above it. You're saying, I don't need to lower my energy to match your noise. And that shift in energy changes everything. When you explain yourself, you invite noise into your space. You hand over your calm and say, here, take it. Please just understand me. But silence doesn't beg for understanding. Silence says, I know my truth, and that's enough. It's a declaration without defense. It's the calm confidence of someone who has outgrown the need for approval. Because real maturity isn't about always having the perfect response. It's about knowing when no response says it all. People mistake silence for weakness because they don't understand it. They expect resistance, argument, fire. When they don't get it, it unsettles them. It makes them sit with their own words, their own behavior, their own noise. And in that discomfort, they reveal themselves. Silence has a way of exposing the truth without you having to lift a finger. It's the mirror that forces others to face what they've been avoiding. When you speak, you give them something to fight with. When you stay silent, you give them nothing to grab onto. Silence doesn't mean agreement. It means discernment. It's knowing that not every battle is worth fighting, not every opinion deserves a reply, not every accusation needs to be corrected. You start to realize that silence isn't passive. It's intentional. It's choosing peace over performance. It's understanding that energy is currency and you don't owe everyone a transaction. You learn to sit in your quiet, knowing that those who need to understand you will, and those who don't were never meant to. When you start embracing silence, you'll notice how uncomfortable people become when they can't get a reaction from you. Because reaction is control. It tells them they've reached you, that they've disturbed your center. But when you stay silent, you take that power back. You teach them that their noise doesn't dictate your peace. You show them that not everything that demands your attention deserves it. Silence is how you stop playing the game. It's how you walk away with your dignity intact while others lose theirs trying to provoke you. Think about how many times you've said more than you needed to just to make someone see your heart. You've explained, justified, clarified, hoping that if they just understood, they'd change their tone, their behavior, their attitude. But they didn't. And you were left drained, not because you were wrong, but because you tried to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. Silence protects you from that trap. It keeps you from pouring wisdom into ears that only want drama. There's a discipline in silence that few people master. It takes self-trust to hold your tongue when your ego is screaming to respond. It takes inner strength to stay calm when someone's trying to provoke you. But that discipline is where your power lies. Because the more you react, the more predictable you become. And predictable people are easy to manipulate. But silent people, unbothered, calm, unreadable, those are the ones who command presence without effort. Silence also gives you perspective. When you stop talking, you start observing. You start seeing the patterns, the same words people use, the same tactics they repeat, the same insecurities they project. Silence turns you into a student of human behavior. It sharpens your awareness. You realize that most conflicts aren't personal, they're projections. And when you understand that, you stop taking things so personally. You stop defending yourself and start understanding others, not to excuse them, but to protect your peace. And let's be honest, words can't always fix what silence can. There are moments when any response will only make things worse. When someone is angry, emotional, or determined to misunderstand, your silence becomes the highest form of intelligence. Because silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care about the right things, your peace, your focus, your energy. You're not ignoring the situation. You're choosing not to feed it. You're saying, this doesn't deserve my words. Silence also forces patience. It teaches you to let time reveal what words can't. People's true colors, intentions, and patterns all surface when you stop engaging. You don't have to expose them. They'll expose themselves. That's the beauty of silence. It allows truth to unfold naturally. And in the end, the truth always speaks louder than your defense ever could. There's another layer to this. Silence is a boundary. It's a way of saying, you no longer have access to me. When someone crosses your line, and instead of reacting, you go silent, that's not avoidance, it's closure. It's emotional detachment disguised as calm, because sometimes the loudest goodbye isn't a speech, it's the quiet you leave behind. That silence echoes louder than any argument. It leaves them wondering, questioning, regretting, because they expected noise and got peace instead. And silence isn't just about others. It's about you. It's about giving yourself space to process, to think, to breathe. When you stop defending, you give yourself permission to listen to your intuition again. You hear your thoughts more clearly when they're not drowned out by someone else's judgment. Silence reconnects you to yourself. It gives you back the focus that over-explaining steals. It turns chaos into clarity. You start to realize that silence isn't empty, it's full. Full of strength, awareness, and restraint. It's a pause between reaction and wisdom. It's what allows you to respond from power instead of pain. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean you don't have an answer. It means you have too much self-respect to give it. In silence, you discover what words often hide. You don't need to win arguments to win peace. You don't need to be understood to be right. You don't need to explain your boundaries to people who benefit from crossing them. The moment you understand that, your silence becomes sacred. It becomes your shield, your filter, your power. And once you learn to sit comfortably in it, no one can pull you into their chaos again. Validation isn't proof. It's permission you don't need. Most people spend their lives chasing approval, seeking affirmation, begging for acknowledgement, thinking that if someone else sees them as right, good, or worthy, then their life will make sense. But here's the hard truth: other people's validation is never the measure of your reality. It's never the standard of your worth. Seeking is like trying to fuel a car with someone else's gasoline. You might move for a while, but eventually you run out and you're stranded. Validation can feel good in the moment, but it's fleeting and it's external, which means it has no real power to stabilize you. When you rely on validation, you give away your authority over your own life. You let someone else decide whether your choices are acceptable, whether your emotions are legitimate, whether your boundaries are respected. You start to adjust yourself constantly, to edit your words, your behavior, your energy to fit the expectations of those around you. And that's exhausting. That's how you end up living in a state of chronic defense. Always proving, always justifying, always reacting. You think you're being reasonable or humble, but what you're really doing is begging for permission to exist on your own terms. Validation is seductive because it promises acceptance, but it's acceptance at the cost of surrender. It's conditional. It's a fleeting nod that you were right in someone else's eyes, not a guarantee that you're living true to your own values. The moment someone disagrees or questions you again, all the validation you received disappears, leaving you feeling unstable, insecure, and desperate to chase it again. That's why it's a trap. It creates dependency on people who are not responsible for your peace or your clarity. You start thinking their approval matters more than your own conviction, and that's a dangerous place to live from. The irony is that validation feels like proof that you're good, that you're justified, that you're on the right path. But it isn't. Proof comes from internal consistency, from integrity, from knowing your own truth and standing firm in it regardless of what anyone else thinks. When you seek validation, you're substituting other people's perceptions for your own inner compass. You're letting their understanding dictate your value instead of grounding yourself in your own experience. And that's how power is lost, not through confrontation or criticism, but through dependence on approval. When you realize that validation is permission you don't need, something shifts. You stop trying to please everyone, stop explaining yourself endlessly, stop negotiating your peace for a fleeting sense of acknowledgement. You start living according to your own standards, guided by your own sense of right, and anchored in your own integrity. The need to justify disappears because you no longer define your actions by how others perceive them. You start understanding that your self-worth is internal, unshakable, and independent of the opinions that float around you like background noise. Validation also distorts reality because it teaches you to chase consensus rather than truth. You start measuring success, morality, and goodness by what others approve of instead of what aligns with your principles. You compromise, you explain, you defend, all in service of appearing acceptable, when the real growth comes from authenticity, not approval. Every time you defend yourself for someone's understanding, you are implicitly saying that their permission is required for your existence. That's the subtle danger of validation. It trains you to believe that your life, your choices, your boundaries, and your truth are negotiable commodities. When you let go of the need for validation, you reclaim your power. You reclaim the ability to decide your own worth and to act without fear of judgment. You stop responding to every challenge or criticism because you realize that no one can strip away the proof that comes from knowing yourself. Your confidence is no longer contingent on agreement. It is self-sustaining. You discover that real authority comes from self-trust, not from applause or acknowledgement. The moment you internalize this, defending yourself loses its grip over you because your energy no longer depends on convincing anyone. Validation is also a distraction. It keeps you busy tending to other people's expectations, focusing on what they might think or say, rather than what you truly know, feel, and intend. You waste hours, days, even years attempting to prove something that doesn't need proving, convincing those who are uninterested in understanding, and shaping yourself according to shifting external standards. The energy spent seeking validation could be invested in growth, in focus, in living a life that aligns with your deepest values. But when you realize validation is permission you don't need, all that wasted effort disappears. You redirect it inward where it matters most. Finally, when you stop depending on validation, you free yourself from fear. Fear of judgment, fear of criticism, fear of misunderstanding. These all vanish when you understand that your worth is not dependent on anyone else. You learn that your life, your decisions, and your boundaries are yours to define, not theirs. And in that freedom, defending yourself becomes unnecessary. You don't need to convince anyone because the only proof that matters is the proof you carry in your own heart and mind. You move through the world untethered from external approval, and in that untethering, you reclaim the full measure of your power, your peace, and your purpose. Confidence is built on clarity, not defense. True confidence doesn't arise from proving yourself to others or constantly explaining your choices. It emerges from a deep understanding of who you are, what you value, and what you will and won't accept. When you are clear about your purpose, your boundaries, and your direction, you no longer feel the need to justify yourself to anyone. You don't need to convince people that you're right because you already know it. That certainty is magnetic, unshakable, and far more powerful than any argument could ever be. Clarity provides a foundation that defense can never give. When you defend yourself, you react. You respond to someone else's narrative, often losing focus on your own. But clarity centers you. It allows you to act with intention rather than reaction, to make choices from strength rather than fear. When you are clear about your goals, your intentions, and your values, You walk through the world anchored in truth, immune to the fluctuations of opinion, judgment, or misunderstanding. You stop over explaining because your actions and presence communicate everything that needs to be said. Defense is temporary. It only works in the moment. It relies on others accepting your explanation, agreeing with your perspective, or validating your choices. Confidence built on defense is unstable. It can be shaken by a single opposing voice or a moment of misunderstanding. Clarity, on the other hand, is internal. It's not given or taken away by anyone. It grows stronger with self-reflection, self-awareness, and alignment with your own principles. The more clarity you cultivate, the less power anyone else has to disturb your sense of self. When you operate from clarity, you begin to see the futility in defending yourself. You realize that no amount of explanation will change someone who is determined to misunderstand. You also understand that defending yourself often leads to energy loss, distraction, and unnecessary stress. Clarity frees you from that cycle. It allows you to focus on what matters, your goals, your growth, your peace. You act with purpose, not with a defensive posture. You move forward without being slowed down by other people's judgments, expectations, or criticisms. Clarity also shapes how others perceive you. People respect those who are self-assured, who speak and act with intention, who don't need to justify themselves constantly. When you are clear, your confidence becomes evident without words. It's reflected in your posture, your tone, your decisions, and your interactions. Defense may momentarily convince, but clarity commands respect effortlessly. People are drawn to clarity because it signals that you know yourself and are comfortable in your own skin. Another key aspect is that clarity gives you resilience. Challenges, criticism, and opposition are inevitable, but when you are clear about who you are and what you stand for, these external pressures don't shake you. You are able to navigate conflict without losing composure because your sense of self isn't contingent on others' opinions. Defending yourself is often reactive and exhausting, while clarity is proactive and sustaining. It allows you to move with calm authority, making decisions that align with your values rather than being dictated by the need to respond to every criticism. Clarity also enhances your decision-making. When your priorities, values, and goals are clear, choices become easier, and you no longer waste time or energy debating yourself internally or externally. You stop second-guessing because your actions are guided by conviction rather than fear of judgment. Defense can cloud judgment, forcing you into a cycle of justification and debate, but clarity illuminates the path forward, making every step intentional and confident. Moreover, clarity empowers communication. When you speak from a place of understanding, your words carry weight. You don't stumble over explanations or seek approval because you are confident in your perspective. Others sense your certainty, and that certainty naturally commands attention and respect. Defense often feels desperate or reactive, while clarity feels grounded and authoritative. The difference is palpable, and it affects not only how people perceive you, but also how you perceive yourself. Finally, confidence built on clarity transforms your relationships. You no longer enter into debates to prove your worth or defend your choices. You interact authentically, establish boundaries without guilt, and expect others to meet you in respect, not compliance. Clarity allows you to be unapologetically yourself, free from the need to defend, justify, or explain. When you operate from this level of self-assuredness, you attract people who value honesty, integrity, and authenticity, and you repel unnecessary conflict that thrives on defensiveness. In essence, confidence and defense cannot coexist. Defense is a reaction to doubt and external pressure. Clarity is an internal anchor that renders defense unnecessary. When you cultivate clarity, you cultivate unwavering confidence. You move through life with purpose, strength, and peace, no longer at the mercy of who understands or approves of you. Every choice becomes a reflection of your internal certainty, and in that certainty, you find a freedom and power that defending yourself could never provide.